Hey guys, welcome to Code Decode. Today, for this mock interview, we have Abhishek with us. He's having 4+ years of experience as a full stack developer with Angular as a front end and Java Spring Boot as a backend part. So let's get started, and we will be covering all the questions, the full stack questions, the front end and the back end questions in this particular mock interview. Also, if you want to be the part of this mock interview series, do let us know by adding your details in the form given in a description below. Now let's get started. Hi Abhishek, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your knowledge with the community. We will always be grateful to be able to have you here on the platform. So guys, he's Abhishek. He's having almost 4+ years of experience, and he's a full stack developer with an awesome tech stack with Spring Boot and Angular as the basic backend and front end tech stacks. So Abhishek, can you brief something about yourself?
Sure. So first of all, thank you so much for having me and giving me this opportunity. My full name is Abhishek Anand, and I'm a full stack developer with almost 5 years of experience. And in my experience, I have worked on Java backend and the Angular frameworks. And in the Angular, I have worked on both AngularJS and Angular 2+. And also at the backend, I have worked on Java frameworks like Ninja, which is very similar to a Spring framework. And I have also experience in Spring Boot. I also have worked on the automation tools like JUnit and Selenium, but these are all the side parts. And apart from that, I have also worked on Jenkins for CI/CD pipeline.
Nice, that's awesome. So let's get started, and let's quickly jump on the mock part now. So I'll start with the backend first, if you're comfortable enough.
Sure, ma'am.
Okay. Have you worked with Java 8 ever?
Yes, ma'am. I have worked on it.
Nice. So can you explain what were the new features that were added with Java 8 and how did you use those features in your programs or applications?
Sure. The most important Java 8 features were like Lambda expressions, method reference, functional interfaces, their new datetime APIs were there.
Can you explain how did you use them and how did it benefit your application?
So sure, ma'am. So Lambda expressions are very useful for functional interfaces as well. So whenever we are implementing any of the functional interfaces, so instead of writing the whole body of the functional interface, we just use the Lambda expressions. So which makes code very concise and clean, and it is very like a highlighted part that it only emphasizes on the logic that what we are trying to do in that expression.
Okay.
And
so that was Lambda expressions.
Right.
Next.
The method reference is also a new feature of Java 8. So in that, what is there? So for example, we already have a method implementation, and we want to use the same implementation, but with a new interface. So for that purpose, we use method reference. So instead of rewriting the implementation or logic again, we can just reference that function to have a new functional interface. So which reduces our effort and time, and also makes the code reusability very high.
Okay. Then we also have something called as streams that were introduced with Java 8.
Right.
What are those?
So streams are basically, for example, whenever we are trying to use any of the transformation functions, so we write many lengthy codes for that. So for that purpose, streams was used, and stream comes with many inbuilt library functions like map, filter, reduce, and all that, which also reduces the time and the logic that we want to use, or the transformation that we want to perform on the data. And also streams comes with parallel streaming, so which helps to perform the options parallelly in a multiple manner.
Okay. So you said that with the streams, the benefit is that you can work upon with multiple elements in a particular collection simultaneously and together.
Right.
Okay. Understood. Then we have datetime API. Ever got a chance to work on that?
Yes, ma'am. So datetime API. So usually before Java 8, we mostly used to work on Java calendar classes. Then we used to set the parameters on that. But the datetime API comes with classes like local date, local time, zone date time, which helps in managing the zone date time effectively. And also it comes with utility methods like of in which we can initialize the instantiate the objects within the given date and given time very easily.
Nice. Anything else you have worked on what comes with Java 8? No?
I cannot remember much as of now.
No, most of us always works with streams and lambdas and references and all. No worries. It's great that you have got a chance to work with the datetime also. Okay, I'm good with this. Now, suppose you have your Java application, okay, and you have your tables in suppose SQL or MySQL or Oracle. Now you need to map a particular table to your Pojo. So how do you do that, and which ORM framework are you using for this?
So for that, I have used Hibernate ORM framework. So in that, we have annotations like @entity, which defines whether and that it is an entity of the database table. And to map it to a particular table, we have @table annotation, in which we have the table name as parameter. So like this, we map the Pojo with the database table. And also inside that, we have lots of annotation for the fields. For the primary key, we have @ID. For columns, we have @column. And in that also, we have different annotations for different use cases and transactions.
Awesome. Okay. Now, what is the difference between @bean and @component? Have you ever used both of them, and where have you used with which scenarios?
Sure. So @bean and @component are basically to create beans only. So @component declares any Spring class as a component, and it enables it for inversion of control and dependency injections. And @bean is also used that, but in @bean, we have the control that how we want to create the object. And then after that, the Spring container handles the initialization and destruction of those objects. And @bean is always used inside configuration class, and it is used mostly on a method. So, for example, whenever we are configuring any data source and we want to customize it, so for that purpose, we use @bean.
And for the complete class, we usually have the
component.
Nice. So you have better control with @bean than as compared to the.
Okay. Right. So like @bean gives us more control on how we want to initialize it, and afterwards the Spring container handles the.
Nice. Okay. So you talk something about the dependency injection. So what is that dependency injection you were talking about?
Yes, so dependency injection is like when, in our project, sometimes we instantiate an object, and then when the use is done, so usually we don't do much on that object, or we just remove the reference, and it is eligible for garbage collection. But in dependency injection, or we can say it is a part of Spring container which comes with inversion of control. So whenever there is a dependency of any class in another class, so Spring checks whether that object, if an object of that class is already available in the container or not. If it is not available in the container, then it instantiate it, and then injects it in the dependable class.
Okay.
And then when the task of that class is done, it also removes that bean from the container.
But if the bean is removed from the container, if any
from that class.
Okay, so how is that bean scoped in Spring?
So we have you're talking about scopes, right? Like prototype, session scopes, singleton scope. So mostly all the beans by default have singleton scope. So that means all the beans will have only one instance. Then we have prototype scope. That means whenever there is a dependency, so every time a new instance of that bean will be created. Then we have session and HTTP sessions. So HTTP sessions is connected to whenever we are using Spring Web module. So in that comes HTTP session and session. So HTTP session is connected to a particular request. So whenever that request ends, then session ends, and the scope of that bean is also ended. But session is connected to the cookies. So if we are passing a request, so until that session is maintained, so the scope, the bean will be also alive.
Okay. So basically, with HTTP request ends, your bean scope ends. But when the session ends, then the bean scope ends with the session. Okay. And there's one more, if I remember. Anything called as global scoped beans?
Not sure.
That is having the global scope. That's fine. Okay. The 4 were perfectly fine. So by default, how is bean scoped in Spring?
By default, it is singleton scope.
Okay. So I have a class A, I have a class B, and both of them requires a dependency of class C. So I have auto-wired class C in class A and class B. Now my task is done in class A. So will that be available for class B now? The class
Yes.
Why?
Because in class B it is still required.
So when will it be garbage collected?
So when so singleton scope beans are always alive in the Spring container. So whenever the Spring server ends, at that time the beans are removed.
Have a look on that once more. But yes, okay. Now the next question is that so you said that we have singleton beans whose life cycle is maintained by the Spring container. So what kind of Spring containers we have in Spring? Any clue?
We have application context, and then we have XML bean factory.
Bean factory, yes. And what are the difference between these two containers? Which is better for you and which you have used, and which one do you find better?
So mostly I have used application context. So bean factory, some of the limitation in bean factory that it supports only XML. But one of the performance advantages of bean factory is that it is lazy loaded. So beans are only initialized when they are required. But in application context, it supports both XML as well as annotations. But there is a performance change in that it always eager loads all the singular beans.
Okay, and what is eager loading and lazy loading?
So, for example, eager loading is that even when there is no dependency of that bean in any of the classes, still that bean will be initialized in the Spring container. But in lazy loading, if there is dependency and that dependency is, we want to inject that dependency, at that time only that bean will be initialized.
Okay. So basically it will not have any memory till it is not required.
Right.
Okay. Sounds great. Okay. Let's get to the next question. How did you implement pagination, be it in front end or back end? That depends upon you. How have you implemented it?
So I'll tell on the backend part, ma'am. So in the Spring Boot, we have something like pageable interface. So pageable interface have page size and page number. So whenever we are initializing a repository, so we can extend it with a JPA repository. So JPA repository comes with pagination and so repository. So in that, whenever we have inbuilt JPA repository comes with inbuilt functions like find all and find by name, or we can customize the functions according to the property of the entity. So in that, whenever if we extend the JPA repository, so we can pass another argument that is pageable. So in that we have the page name, page size, and page number, and the return is a page of type of the entity. So page contains the collection of the object with the page name and page size as details.
Page name.
Sorry, I mean page size and page number as details.
Okay. And how do you pass that on front end? So you got all those records with the pagination part. How do you handle that on front end now?
So on the front end part, we can check. It is passed as a JSON, so we can change that. We can check that page attribute, and we can check. We can check on which page and page size we are on currently, and based on that, if you want to hit any next HTTP request, so we can change the page size and page number.
Okay, that's nice. How have you implemented caching in your application to improve the performance of the application?
Yeah, so Spring Boot comes with caching mechanism. So for that, we can use enable caching annotation in the Spring main application, and that on any method level we can use cacheable annotation. So cacheable annotation enables the function response to be cached. So for example, and we can also pass the name of the cache that we want to use for that method. So it will always cache that response in that particular cache with that particular name.
Okay, understood. Then, did you use any of the ORM frameworks inbuilt caching mechanism, or that's something given by the Spring framework?
Yeah, Hibernate comes with its own caching mechanism. So Hibernate has two layers of caching mechanism. So first layer is enabled by default, and second layer is disabled by default. So for that, to enable second layer caching, we need to do extra configuration for that. But I have not used that second level much.
No worries. So how is it linked? So there are two things: session and session factory. So which is linked with which?
Sorry, what?
So first level cache is linked with session or session factory?
Session it is linked to session.
Okay. So when your session ends, your cache is also gone.
Yes.
So this was creating an issue of handling your caching between multiple sessions. So that is why the second layer of session comes with session factory. Sounds great. Okay, that sounds great to me. What is the purpose of @controller advice? Have you ever used @controller advice in your application, and why?
Yes, ma'am. So @controller advice is used for global exception handling in a Spring Boot application. So for example, on any of the controllers or beyond on the inside that whole controller, if there is an exception, so that is handled by controller advice. So controller advice is a class level annotation, and inside that we have another annotation that is used with conjunction with that, and that is exception handler. So in that exception handler, we actually pass the type of exception that we want to handle, and that method we can use to return the HTTP response for that. So we can have the HTTP response entity, and with that we can also pass the status code with that. So for example, any internal server error or forbidden or unauthorized, like that.
Okay, understood. Now my question is that I have multiple classes. Okay, from one of my class, one exception is thrown, and I've not handled it anywhere in the class itself. So where this will be handled next? If nobody is handling it,
this is a controller class. Oh,
it's anything. It's service layer, but controller is the parent who is calling the service layer. But I've not done exception handling anywhere. Then who is it going to handle? Is it the global exception handler, or it will not be handled by any? It will be directly handled by JVM or Spring for us.
No, it will be handled by global exception handler. So the global exception advice that we defined, so that will handle that exception if we have defined the handler for that particular exception.
Only if you have a proper exception handler for that particular exception, then only. So if I want that all my exceptions, be it any exception which I have not handled explicitly, there should be one generic one. So can I have that also?
Yes, so you can define the exception handler for the basic Java exception. So that will handle all the exceptions.
Okay. When it gets coming to exceptions, so have you ever done the custom exception handling in Spring application?
No.
With try and catch, simple try catch.
Yeah, try and catch. I've used simple try and catch.
So that's how you have done your custom exception handling, with giving your own custom exceptions. Okay.
Right.
Now suppose controller is giving a call to service. Service is giving a call to repository. Repository is giving a query to the database.
Sure.
It has given an exception, SQL exception, that your query is wrong. Then how is the stack trace going to be, and how will you handle it? I would like to know your approach. How would you handle this SQL query based exceptions in your application?
So first of all, one important thing is that at the rate repository, if you have a repository layer, so that converts the checked exceptions into unchecked exceptions.
Okay.
So that is handled there. And even if that unchecked exception is thrown, so we can handle that check the exception either at the service layer and with the try catch block. So service layer, in the try catch block, we can check the type of exception, and then we can pass that exception, or we can convert that exception for a proper message to for that. So we can convert our that exception in our own exception, and then we can also have a controller advice which will handle that our converted exception to send a proper response to the client.
Okay, so you were going to mix both your custom exception handling and global exception handling. Is it really needed? I mean, can I do it just
for
with custom?
for logging purpose, ma'am, we can use that because if we are logging that, so we cannot log the same message that we are sending to the client. So to have a detailed message for the logging purpose, we can use the try catch block. Inside the catch block, we can log the message for our debugging
Nice.
purpose, and then we can pass on the exception to convert in a proper message format for the client.
Nice. Sounds perfect to me. Yes, even combination of both is also allowed. Perfect. Okay, when it comes to custom exception handling, how do you create your own custom exception?
So mostly it is we extend the runtime exception, and then we use the runtime exception. We override the runtime exception methods, that is message and all those things.
Get message.
And then we
Mhm.
when at the time of throwing the exception, we use that our own custom defined exception.
Okay. If a method has throw, it has to have throws, or it is not necessary. Simple Java code, Java question.
It depends, ma'am. If it is a unchecked exception, then we don't need to have throws in the function level. But if it is a checked exception, then we need to have throws keyword.
Okay, and if my method has a throw keyword, throw new age invalid exception, then
Sorry, what? Throw new?
invalid age exception, any of my custom exception, then is the throws compulsory?
No, ma'am, it is not. Because our mostly because as per the design, we usually extend the runtime exception, right? So so it is a checked exception. Sorry, unchecked exception. So for that, we don't need a throws keyword.
I have a look on that, because if a method is throwing something, then it has to notify its parent that I can throw some custom exceptions going forward. So just have a look on this.
Sure.
Okay, no worries. And that was just a code Java question in between. No worries. Okay, so you were talking something about the queries part, the invalid query part. So if suppose I'm using the ORM framework, but I have a very complex query with multiple joins and everything, which cannot be done with your simple find by ID, find by, and those type of simple queries, straightforward queries, then how do you write such complex queries in your project?
So we also have something like @query annotation. So @query annotation, we can pass those complex SQL queries, or we can pass it as a native query, which is dependent on the database.
So you talked about SQL query, native query. I would ask something about what all type of queries you know in Hibernate.
So in Hibernate, mostly we use SQL queries, which is based on the entities that we have mapped.
Okay.
And also we have JPA also provides the library for query creation and execution.
What is criteria query then?
Yeah, that's that I was talking about. I forgot the name.
No, okay. So what does this criteria query is all about? Any clue?
So, for example, if we are using very complex queries, so instead of writing that complex query at once in one point string format, we can have the criteria query, and we can use the mapped entities, and we can add all the parameters, all the filters that we want to use for that.
Nice. Okay.
And that criteria query internally transform that query in the database format.
Nice. Okay.
Readable format.
Table readable format. Okay, understood. If I want to update or delete something using the criteria query, can I do that?
No, it is not. Mostly criteria query is used for fetching purpose.
Yes. So the limitation of criteria queries, you cannot update or delete something. You can just have the fetch functionality. Nice. Okay. Now I'll come to bit high level questions if okay. I'll in the backend part, not yet on the front end part. So what is the difference between Gradle and Maven?
So Gradle and Maven are both of, we can say, the build a tool for any applications, but Gradle comes with some of the advantages that Maven misses. So first thing is in Maven we have dependency management and all those things, but in Gradle, which is written in DSL language, which is very versatile. So in that we can also write scripts for building the project in the Java language format as well. And also in Gradle also has more flexibility of the dependency management, which Maven misses. And in the Gradle also the performance is very high, because in Gradle we have different phases of execution. Like we have configuration phase, and we have execution phase, which Maven doesn't have. So in configuration phase, Gradle checks what all needs to be done in the execution phase, and if all the things are compiled and Gradle decide, okay, there are execution, we need to have execution phase, so only those part of the script will be executed in the execution phase.
Nice. Okay. Now when it comes to POM, you said that there is dependency management part, right? So apart from just dependency management, what all things extra you have in POM? Can you explain something about that POM?
So in pom.xml, we can also have a little bit of configurations about the project, like what are our source directories, what are our resources directory, what are our test directories. So all those things we can configure in POM file.
And how do you configure that?
I don't have the syntax.
No worries. That's okay. Okay. Even I would like to know how do we do that. I didn't get a sense. Nice point. I never did that. Okay. Now, suppose I want to build a particular project as a war and not a jar. Then how can I do that with POM?
So we have a package tag inside POM. So inside we can define a package and its value as war.
Okay.
So, and then we also need to have the war plugins for that particular project. So then only it will be able to package the project as well.
Okay, and how do you configure the plugins?
So we have something like plugins management in Maven. So it usually starts with plugins, and then inside that we can define different plugins.
Okay. Now suppose I am adding one dependency. I want to exclude that during the plugin management. How can I do that?
Sorry, you want to exclude during
plugin management part. These plugins management part below the dependency part, right? So
right.
Can we exclude any of the dependencies into that?
For the dependency management, I know we can exclude some of the nested dependencies. So for example, we have any dependency. For example, if I take the example of Spring only, so we have a Spring Web dependency. So in that Spring Web dependency, we inherently have the Tomcat dependency. So if you want to remove that dependency, we can use the exclude tag, and then we can remove the Tomcat dependency, which is Spring Boot starter Tomcat. But I'm not sure about the plugin.
This was about the dependency you were talking about, that from the Spring Web parent starter dependency, we can remove the Tomcat and add the Jetty. Okay, no worries. Okay, I understood that, but no worries. I'll move to the CI/CD part. Have you worked with a DevOps ever?
Little bit I have worked on it.
Okay, so what is CI/CD?
So CI/CD is basically continuous integration and continuous deployment. So which helps us in automating the flow of the deployment and integration process. So for example, we are having a code, and there is a version control like Git is there. So whenever we push our code to any version control like Git, so in Jenkins we can we can automate the script so that whenever there is code changes or if someone pushes a code into the Git, so Jenkins will start on a script and it will compile the code, build the code, and if we can also have the testing mechanism in that, so it will also test the quality of the code inside that, and if everything goes right, so it can also do the deployment of the code in our either of our development server or the testing server, or even if the code is ready, we can deploy it on the production server.
Okay. So that is a part of CD, the deployment part. Once the Git CI part is done. Okay. Sounds great. Which tool have you used for CI?
So for integration part, I mostly use that Jenkins only, and with that, I have in combination of that, I have used the Gradle for building the project.
Build tool. Okay, understood. Sounds great. I'll quickly move to the GA unit testing part. Have you tested your unit tested your code?
Yes.
How do you do that?
So in GA we have something like @test annotation. So for that we can use that is a method level annotation, and we can annotate a particular method with the test, and we can also provide the name of the test. So whenever a method executes, if there is no exception in that, so the unit will consider that test as passed. If there is an exception in that, so it will fail the test.
Okay, now suppose I am expecting an exception. Now suppose there is a method who validates the age and throws an exception if age is greater than 50. This is the business use case. I have to write a JUnit for this. So I know that I'm going to pass an input as age as 55. And I know that it is going to fail. It is going to throw an exception. So I need to validate this functionality, business use case, that since I know that I'm passing 55 and my expectation is that it should fail because it is greater than 50. So how can I do that? Because the method is throwing an exception, so JUnit will fail according to you. But should it be the case?
So we have something like listeners. So listeners are used to catch the exception. So we have something like if an exception is thrown, so for that purpose we can define a listener which will listen to that test case exception.
Isn't that as simple as assert throws?
Yeah, that I can also use, but as you said, an exception is already thrown, so to catch that exception. So from that point of view, I was telling.
Okay, understood. Okay. Towards that complexity, I was just expecting a simple assert throws. That's it. Okay, that sounds perfect to me. I think I'm done with the JUnit part also. I have some Java 8 stream questions. Are you comfortable with the coding part?
Sure.
Okay, then I'm going to transition back and I'm going to showcase the screen, and we're going to have a coding round on this. Works?
Sure.
Okay. Is this are these questions visible, Abhishek?
Yes.
Okay. So first two are very simple ones. We have to write a simple method which is going to find the sum of all even numbers in a list using Java 8. And suppose my list L equals to say 2, 3, 4, 5. Very simple. So we have two even numbers, 2 and 4. So we need to find the sum of these even numbers. That becomes 6. So my output should be 6 here. So can you just write a simple string program using streams?
Sure. Yeah, is this fine?
Okay, so first you're opening a string to the list or the collection. Then you're filtering out only those values which are percentile equal to 0. So at this step, you will have only 2 and 4, and 3 and 5 will be removed during the filter part. And after
Right.
that, you are going to map each of these values to proper int value and then do the summation, because on integer you cannot perform the summations. You need to have a primitive int for the summation part. This sounds
Yes.
perfect to me. Okay, that's fine. I'll go for the second one. Write a method to convert the list of string to uppercase and join them with comma. And suppose my list is having 3 names. Just 1 second. Okay. So I have small, in small letters, a cat, a dog, and a cow. So now what I need is that all these has to be done as an uppercase. So I should have cat, and then it should be separated with a comma. So dog, comma, cow. This is what is an expected output. So can we do that?
Yes, ma'am, sure. Is this an array or a list, ma'am?
You can consider this as a list, because anyways, if you want to work with streams, you need to have a collection. So with an array,
Sure.
you cannot work.
Right.
Okay, so you have your list on that you have opened a stream, then you have mapped each of this value to its uppercase. So now you have again a stream of list, a stream of strings with cat as capital, dog as capital, cow as capital. Now you need to collect all of these to a single string, and that is why you have used the collectors to collect them, and you have concatenated using the comma operator. Okay, sounds great. But now I have one small question on this. There's some concept called as terminal operators and intermediate operators. So
Right.
in this and this, which is a terminal operator and which is a intermediate operator?
So in this map is a intermediate operator, and collect is a terminal operator. So basically, intermediate operators are those operators which return stream, but terminal operators are, or we can say terminal functions are those functions which don't return a stream or the value that we want to be collected, or we can to be returned.
Okay, understood. Now I have one small question. Okay, suppose I have a class A. Okay, in this class A, I have a method similar to your method. Okay, but the method is just going to print, so it's going to return nothing. It is just going to print me. and it is not going to take anything. It is just going to do system.out.println hi Abhishek. Okay. A simple method. Fine.
Yes.
Now here I'm just modifying your answer. This answer is correct. I am not going to deny that for sure. I have just a very simple method to map each of this or in this map what I'll do is rather for each of these values I'm just going to call this method a colon print. So I would be expecting for each of these values, that is 3 values, I should have hi Abhishek printed twice. So what if I evaluate this result, what should be the output?
There will be an exception, ma'am, because it is a intermediate function, so it expects an
Terminal operator.
yeah, it expects a stream, but since that function, okay. So actually, there will be an exception because the result that we are expecting is a string, right? But since map is an intermediate function, so it is returning as a string. So there will be that exception because stream cannot be converted to string itself.
Nice.
But there will be no we can say change in the values of the list.
Okay, agree. Now I'm going to return. So suppose I'm going to return void here. I'm not going to return anything. Now I have my values. I'm going to open a stream. I'm going to have a map, and in this map for each value I'm going to print hi Abhishek. So what will be the will the console have hi Abhishek here?
Yes, it will print the hi Abhishek.
Will it?
Okay, I think so.
And how many times?
The number of items in the list.
That is?
So that is 3 times.
Oh, that is wrong. The reason being, intermediate operation doesn't work until and unless there is a terminal operator. So these are lazy loaded. The map will be very much lazy loaded. I say I am not going to print hi Abhishek until you give me a terminal operator.
Okay, yeah. I got this.
No worries. Nice try, man. Nice try. I think the time is actually running up, so I'm going to move to the another part, that is the front end part. Quickly I'll draw some diagram here. So I have, suppose, my backend. Okay, so I have my front end here. Just 1 second. I have my backend here, and I have a database here. I need a cylinder for this. Okay. So this is okay. Again, this is going to be my client. Thin or thick light depends upon the requirement. So what client does is it requests that go get me the data from database. So from now on, you have to tell me a complete flow from front end to back end to DB and back to the client, how your request actually passes. Complete end-to-end flow with controller, service, everything, and how do you handle exceptions, how do you make this resilient, how do you make it scalable, everything I would like to know.
So for the front end we are using Angular, right?
Yes.
Okay, so based on any particular event, whether we can have some click event or some other events, based on that, if we can fire one HTTP request. So in the front end part, we'll have HTTP request from a service which will return an observable. Okay. And when that request is being fired to the backend part. So we'll have the Spring Boot application, REST application. So controller will get that application, and also we'll have the pagination parameters in that request from the front end. So at the controller level, we'll have the pagination parameters, that is page number or page size in the controller params, and that will be a query param. And from that we'll have this transfer this to the request from the controller to the service layer, and in that service layer we'll convert that query, we can say pagination parameters to the pageable object of the Spring Boot, and then we'll pass that a request to the repository layer. Repository layer will get the data according to the pagination parameters, that is page number and page size, and that if the that will return a page object. So that page object will as it is return to the client part in the form of JSON, and on the front end part, sorry, and at the front end part we will perform some cleaning action on that JSON, because we don't want that pagination parameters to be displayed. So we'll have this, we'll store that pagination parameters in our front end variables, and then we'll display the data to the client. And for the back end part in the Spring, we can have the controller advise if anything goes wrong to handle the exceptions. And we'll have one of our custom exceptions according to our application, and then we'll have that controller advice and with the exception handler.
That was the flow. Okay, so you have a observable here. Okay, so you have subscribed to that observable. How does that work? The subscription to observable.
Yes, in one of our service will subscribe to sorry, in the component the HTTP request will be fired from a service, but will subscribe to that observable in our component, and when the value is present in our component, we'll process that value, and then we'll show it on the UI using the template.
Using the template. Okay, understood. Now my question is that and client will get the response. Okay, now this front end is working at 4200 port number, right?
Okay.
Backend is working at 8080 port number.
Right.
This will give you a cross origin exception, right?
Right.
So how do you handle that?
So in Spring, we can allow the different, we can have core settings. So with that, in that we allow different domains that, like whitelisting the domains that we want to allow the request from. So for that, we have something like HTTP. In Spring Boot, we have HTTP object. In that HTTP object, we have the allow origin method. So we can use that method to allow the domains that we want the request from.
Okay, so you mean to say that this is it is going to have a filter here. That filter is going to have the security filter is going to have your logic to allow or reject your request based on the configurations you do in your security configuration class, right?
Right.
Okay, so for cross origin annotation is enough for your cross origin exceptions handling and your configuration class interceptors for handling your allow and permit of your HTTP request from frontend to backend. Okay.
Yes.
Sounds great. Now I'll quickly jump to the front end part because time is not permitting at all. I'll transition back. Okay. This was a nice coding part and the explanation to the front end and back end. Let's continue with the interview questions we have for the front end part quickly now. Okay.
Sure.
So starting with what is data binding? What are the types of data binding we have in Angular?
So in Angular, we have data binding to interact with our templates and the TypeScript file. So for that purpose, we have data binding. So there are basically three types of data binding. That is property binding, attribute binding, and we have interpolations. And binding is also like there is one way binding that and there is two way data binding. So in one way data binding we have two directions, that is either from the TypeScript file to the template or to the template to the TypeScript. But in the two way we can have the bindings in both the directions.
TypeScript or component?
Sorry, component.
Okay, understood. So, okay. And interpolation, what is interpolation? Sorry, I missed that.
So in Angular we have interpolation, which is denoted by two curly braces. So inside the two curly braces we can have any expression, and that
Okay.
expression will be evaluated, and the final value will be rendered in the UI, or you can say template.
Okay, sounds great. Okay. Now I have a button click. Okay. On that, I want to call a particular method. So, under which will it fall?
Event binding.
Okay. Because that is an event, and we are going to handle that event. So that is event binding. Okay. Now there is a form. That form is getting filled, and based on that, the data has to be sent, and an event has to be occurred. So, which binding will you use in such cases? Because we need the data from the template to component, and also need to handle that.
So for that we'll have the event binding.
Okay, understood. And returning back, how will you do that? Getting the data back to component to template after
Property binding. We'll have that property binding.
Okay.
Or we can, if there is a collection of the data, so for that we can also use ng4 to render multiple elements in the template.
Okay, sounds perfect. Okay. What are single page applications?
So, ma'am, single page applications are applications in which the content of the page, or we can say only the part of the whole HTML page, is changed based upon the request of the client. The whole page, or we can say the outer layout, never changes. Only the middle content changes.
So basically, the whole page is not getting refreshed; just the part of the page is getting refreshed.
Yes.
That sounds perfect. Yes. So how is it different from the old legacy applications where the whole page used to refresh, and what was the performance bottlenecks because of which the single page applications were introduced?
Okay, so in the conventional page layout, so whenever we used to have any action, so for example we are using the click event or something like that, and based on that, if we are going to a different URL, and so for that purpose the whole the outer template and the main content needs to be loaded. It was a duplicate, we can say unnecessary utilization of resources and the bandwidth. So for that purpose, single page applications are very handy and very efficient in performance and the resources. So because in that the whole page doesn't need to load, only the part of the page needs to be refreshed.
Okay, that sounds perfect. So Angular internally uses TypeScript. So how is this TypeScript different from JavaScript?
So we can say, ma'am, TypeScript is a superset of JavaScript. So it has all the features of JavaScript, but apart from that, it also has features like a compiler, which we can use to detect the error in our codes at the compile time only. It also has a strict mechanism. So, for example, if we are using any strict null checks, so if in any of our code we are using any variables which can be null, so TypeScript will automatically tell us that there is a chance of getting null exception there.
Okay, so this TypeScript strict checking for your data. Understood. Are our browsers that updated now that they can understand your TypeScript that you write?
No, ma'am. Our browsers only detect the JavaScript only. So what happens in Angular, we write our code in JavaScript, but at the time of building, or we can say compilation, so that TypeScript code is converted to JavaScript, and then that JavaScript code is run on our browsers.
Okay. It's done during the runtime or during the compile
time? During the compile.
The data is converted, the TypeScript converted to JavaScript.
Yes.
Okay, but in the Chrome, I can just do F12 and see all the data that you have written, all the TypeScripts that you have written. So how to protect that vulnerability of your code view by hackers?
For that purpose, we can use two mechanisms. One is encryption of our scripts, and also we can minimization of our scripts. So,
how do you do the minimizations?
So we have different libraries that we can use to minimize our code. So that will compress our code and will have that on the UI. Sorry, on the browser.
Understood. Okay, going forward, what are decorators in Angular?
So, decorators are classes that store metadata about the Angular elements. So, for example, we have @component. So, @component is also a decorator, which define what are the different elements of that component. Is like we have template, we have selectors, and we have style sheets. All those things.
Selectors and style sheets. Sorry for interrupting you. What are selectors and what are style sheets?
So selectors are basically a way to name the component, and it should be unique in the whole Angular component tree. So based on that, Angular creates a map of all the components that are available in the application, and there are style sheets. So we can define style sheets URLs in the component, so that styles will be applied to that particular component. We can have single or multiple style sheets defined in a component.
Usually your beautification code goes there, right?
Right.
Okay. And what are templates?
So templates are like blueprint, we can say, blueprint of a UI component that we want to render. And based on the data that we have passed on that template, it will render those data. But the skeleton will be more or less the same.
Now I have one question on the templates part. In the Angular application, if you said that the template is the part which is shown to client, right? This is the blueprint of your UI that you show to your client. I agree on that. That's perfectly fine. But my question is that if my UI is very simple, one single liner, I just want to say, hi Abhishek, do I have to create a complete whole template file for this, or can inline HTML CSS will work for the templates here?
Yeah, you can have inline. So in Angular component, we can declare templates using two ways. That one is inline and one is for external files. So when we are using external files, we have the template URL. And other than that, we have another property that is template. Inside that template, we can declare the inline HTML contents. So that can be one liner.
Okay, nice. That's nice. That's perfect. What are pipes in Angular?
So pipes are used to pipes are usually used to perform action on the input data and give some output. So that is we can say the basic definition of pipes. So pipes are basically used mostly to transform the data or to format the data in another format.
What are some inbuilt pipes if you have used any?
So that is we can have uppercase, lowercase, and then we have currency pipes, and we have date pipes. So that will transform the dates in a particular format.
Now I want to have my own custom pipes. How can I do that?
So for that, we can declare one class map that will implement the pipe transform interface, and we can decorate that class with @pipe annotation, and then we can have the property as name of the pipe. And inside that class, we'll need to override one function that is transform. So transform takes we can say two types of parameters. That is the one single value, and then it takes a string of values.
Okay.
And then inside that transform function, the first argument is the actual value on which we need to perform the action, and the later values are we can say additional arguments of the function, which will help to determine that what else we need to do on that function, on that transform function. And then after that, we can return that final value. So that will be our custom pipe.
Okay, that sounds great. Okay, can you give me an example where you have used custom pipes in your application? For what reason?
Yes. So, for example, ma'am, if we want to convert our currency, but the standard currency pipe is have different format, but we want to display it in a kind of a different format with different decimal number of decimal values, and also we can have that symbol and all. So for that purpose, we can define our own custom pipes.
Sounds perfect. What is this pipe transform interface? Have you worked with that, and why have you worked with that ever?
So pipe transform interface is the actual interface that we need to implement whenever we are creating our custom pipes also. Any and the Angular also, in any of the Angular pipes that we're using, inbuilt Angular pipes, that also uses that pipe transform interface only, which have that transform function.
Okay. Okay, understood. What is the difference between AOT and JIT?
So these are the two different types of compiler that we use in Angular application. So AOT is basically ahead of time compiler, and JIT is just in time compiler. So what happens is, at the time of building the project, so all our JavaScript codes are first converted into TypeScript codes are converted into JavaScript. But what happens to the Angular codes that we have written? So that is defined. How it should be compiled or when it should be compiled is decided by AOT or JIT compilers. In the AOT compiler, it is compiled beforehand, and at the final output data that is sent to the browser, it does not include any of the compiler, and the final content is sent to the browser. But in JIT compiler, only the JavaScript part is sent to the browser along with the Angular compiler. So at the time of at the runtime, the Angular code is converted into the final JavaScript code, or whatever the operation that needs to be performed on the views. So that is there. So one we can say one advantage in AOT compiler is that the final package, that is the final build and that is created, that is very small in size because it does not contain the Angular compiler. But in JIT compiler, the package size is relatively bigger because it contains the Angular compiler.
Okay. The main difference lies in when it is actually compiled. So one is build time and one is the execution time. So who works at build time and who works at execution time?
AOT compiler works at build time and JIT compiler works at execution time.
So whose performance will become better?
AOT performance will be better.
Why?
Because in the browser, the code that is present is already compiled, so there is no need for compilation, and the package is also very small.
Even
So so it will load faster and it will also execute faster.
Oh, sounds great. Okay. Can you explain what are promises and observables in Angular?
Yes, so promises and observables are basically used for asynchronous operations, and mostly we can say if you're using firing any HTTP request, at that time we use observables or promises based upon our requirement. But there are some differences in observables and promises, and that is observables are lazy loaded, but promises are eager loaded. So even whenever we are subscribing to any observable, then only it will fire the request. Other than that, if there is no subscription to any of the observable, it will not fire the request. But in case of promise, that's not the case, because whenever we initiate a promise, it will, at that time only, it will fire the request or whatever operation that we want to perform.
So main difference is in eager and lazy loading.
And also, ma'am, observables can be synchronous as well as asynchronous, but promises are always asynchronous.
Okay. And if it is asynchronous, how do you maintain that concurrency part?
In observable.
Which one is asynchronous?
Promise is asynchronous.
Okay. So how does that work? Is it will leave and it will expect that whenever the response comes, I'll handle it like that, right? So how does
Yes.
it maintain the subscriptions in that situations?
So we have in that resolve and reject methods that we define. So whenever there is a if the execution goes correctly, so the resolve part will be executed. So at the time of uh, defining the promise, if we are accessing the promise, so at that time we define our resolve and reject functions. So that is included in the then function is there. Inside that then function, we define our resolve and reject functions.
Okay, understood. In which case have you used promise, and in which cases you have used observables in your application?
So in Angular, ma'am, mostly when we are firing in HTTP requests, so at that time I have mostly used observables instead of promise.
And why?
Because of its lazy loading factor. Because if any of the component is not subscribing to that observable, then it doesn't need to fire that HTTP request.
It will be a performance bottleneck.
Right.
Okay, nice. Now I have two components, and I need to share the data between these two different components. Say, for example, there's a user component, there's a food catalog component. So if I want to share the user details to this food restaurant service component, how can I share that data? Because suppose in the front end part on the restaurant page, I need to show dear Abhishek, that the user information has to be shared. How can I do that?
So for that purpose, we can use services. So services are another concepts in Angular which can be used across different components. So for that, we'll fetch the data from one component, or we can say, and then we'll catch it in the another component.
Now suppose these two components are in two different complete modules. These are not the part of same modules now.
So then also in both the modules, we can declare these services and then we can use them.
Because services are globally usable. Nice. That was nice. Okay. Any other possibility in another way apart from using services?
So if there is a parent-child relationship between two components, so then there is another way, that is with the use of input decorator and the output decorators. So input decorators are used to get the data from the parent component, and output decorators are used to get the data in the parent component from the child component.
From the child component. Okay, the another way. Okay, understood. Now suppose I want to make the data in both the ways. I mean, I need the data from parent to child and at the same time. How is there any possibility to have it at the runtime? Take the data and send the data in one single go.
We can, for that purpose, we can use property binding.
Okay, and make
like two-way property binding. Two-way property binding, we can use that.
But the property binding, the property is very specific to component. It is not going to be shared with different components now.
Right. Like I was saying, in respect to the parent and child relationship.
Okay. Okay, and then you're going to pass it to?
Sorry, I didn't get.
As in, how will you pass that properties value to the another component?
In case of parent-child, or they are different?
In the parent-child.
So, in property binding, we said, right? So, in the parent template, whenever we are declaring the dependency of child component using that child selector, so at that time we can pass the property in the square brackets. Nice. And in the child component, we'll have that input decorator on the property that we want to fetch from the parent component. So,
perfect.
So that input decorator will handle that property.
Nice. Internally, it will fetch that value using the square bracket property. Okay. Nice. Now, what are routers and what are router links in Angular?
So for Angular can be used for both ways, and that is as a single page application or as a standalone application. But the main effectiveness of Angular will come when we are using single page applications. And for single page applications to work, we need to have router Angular routes to come into picture. So for Angular routes, we need to have first we need to define the routes in the module, and then in the main we can say at main index file, we can have the router outlet tag, which will basically render the different components or inside that. And for router for example, if we want to traverse from one component, or we can say one path to another path, so instead of using anchor tags for the links, we can use router link. So router link will Angular will detect, okay, this is a Angular path, so it will traverse from that one path to another in the same and it will behave as a single page application.
Okay, understood. Okay, fine. What are HTTP interceptors?
So HTTP interceptors are used to intercept any of the HTTP requests, and if you want to perform or if you want to change any of the HTTP request parameters, that can be done in the HTTP interceptors.
Have you ever used HTTP interceptors, and for what reasons have you used it?
Yes, so mostly HTTP interceptors I have used to add authentication tokens.
Nice.
Inside the request.
Yes. So while sending the request, you need to send the authentication part as a JWT token to make it a valid request. Nice. I think I am done with all the questions. I'll quickly share the feedback. Let me transition back to my screen. I have my questions available here now. So for the quick feedback, you were perfectly fine with the backend part. You were great with this. This is also great. This is also fine. Pagination also you have implemented properly. Caching is also fine. Just have a look with throw and throws keyword. Basic core Java questions. Nothing much to look upon.
Sure.
Basic core Java throws. Just have a look on that. With this global exception handling, you are good. Lazy loading, yes, this is perfectly fine. For complex queries, just have a look on how many types of queries we have: native query and non-such queries. One is domain specific query, entity specific query. That is also one type of query that can also be asked. Just have a look on that. And you have rest answers perfectly fine. Gradle Maven is fine. These all things are fine. You have answered most of the Java 8 questions also. Both the questions were perfectly answered. That is also fine. For the Angular part, bindings you have answered properly. Single page application is also fine. These are also fine. Pipes and custom pipes are also fine. For me, this is perfectly fine. I think with respect to Angular, you are awesome. There's some type of brush ups on the core Java part of the backend part is required. I think that is all feedback I have. We are very well prepared, man. Very nice.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much.
Any feedback for me? Any questions for me?
No, ma'am. Actually, it's a feedback only because when I was preparing, so I was going through a lot of videos of the Decode channel only. So it helped me a lot in preparing that. What are the questions that I need to prepare, and also how I need to respond to that.
That was so nice of you. Thank you so much for sharing knowledge with the community. We will always be in depth with you, man. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Abhishek. This was such a nice interview. You were very well prepared. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with us and all the community. Also, if you guys want to be the part of this mock interview series, do let us know by adding your details in the form given in the description below. Thank you so much.